Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Josiah Cray had stopped believing in anything the day he buried his wife and daughter. Not in Guayna, not in justice, not in the basic goodness of mankind. 5 years of solitude in the Wyoming wilderness had stripped away every illusion he once held dear. Now he understood only one truth. Silence never betrayed you. Silence never made promises it could not keep. Silence never burned your home to the ground while the people you loved screamed inside. He was 42 years old. His beard had grown long and streaked with gray. His hands were calloused from setting beaver traps and skinning hides. His eyes had turned hard as flint, holding no warmth for strangers and even less for himself. That January afternoon found him riding along the Bighorn River, checking trap lines as he did every third day through the winter months. Snow blanketed the valley in thick white drifts. The sky hung low and heavy with the promise of more to come. His buckskin mare moved steady beneath him, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Josiah had chosen this remote corner of Wyoming territory precisely because nobody came here. No settlers pushing westward, no cavalry patrols hunting renegades, no ghosts from a past he desperately wanted to forget. Just endless mountains, frozen rivers, and the merciful silence he craved. Then gunfire shattered that silence. Two sharp cracks echoed across the valley from somewhere upstream, half a mile distant, maybe less. The sounds bounced off canyon walls and faded into the winter wind, leaving only the steady rush of the river below. Josiah pulled his mare to a halt and listened. Whatever trouble existed up there belonged to someone else. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Caring about others only invited pain. The world took everything you loved and offered nothing in return except more suffering. He gathered his reins and prepared to ride on. Then he saw the shape in the water. A dark form tumbled through the current 50 yards downstream, moving, struggling, human. Josiah squinted against the glare of snow and saw arms thrashing, black hair streaming, a body fighting desperately to stay above the surface. A woman. She grabbed hold of a fallen log and clung there as the icy current tried to tear her loose. Her movements were already slowing. The Bighorn ran cold enough in January to kill a strong man in 5 minutes. A wounded woman half her size would last maybe 3. Josiah watched for the space of 2 heartbeats. His mind told him to ride away. This was not his fight, not his concern. Every instinct built over 5 years of isolation screamed at him to turn his horse and disappear into the mountains. His body refused to obey. 20 years in the United States cavalry had burned certain responses deep into his bones. You did not leave a fellow human being to drown. Not even when your heart had turned to stone and your soul felt hollow as an empty cartridge case. He spurred his mare down the riverbank. Snow sprayed beneath pounding hooves. Josiah reached the water's edge, vaulted from the saddle, and grabbed the coiled rope hanging from his saddle horn. One end he tied fast around a thick cottonwood trunk. The other he wrapped twice around his waist and knotted tight. Then he waded into the river.
You have to leave me behind.
The
They'll deal
cold
with
hit
you.
him like a physical blow.
I pulled you out of the river. I won't leave you again.
Stabbing into flesh. His lungs seized and his muscles cramped, but he forced himself deeper. Chest high now, the current grabbed at his legs with greedy hands, trying to sweep him off his feet and drag him under. The woman saw him coming. Her eyes went wild with desperate hope. She released one hand from the log and reached toward him, fingers clawing at the air between them. Josiah lunged forward and caught her wrist. She was heavier than expected. Waterlogged deerskin clothing added 30 pounds to her frame. The current fought him for possession of her body, trying to wrench her from his grip and carry her downstream to certain death. He pulled with everything he had. For one terrible moment, his boots lost purchase on the slick river stones. He felt himself sliding, tilting, the freezing water rising toward his chin. Then his heel caught on something solid. He dug in and hauled backward, dragging the woman through the shallows until they both collapsed on the frozen bank. She coughed violently, river water spilling from her mouth in great heaving gags. Her lips had turned blue as a winter sky. Her whole body shook with tremors beyond her control. But through it all, one hand remained clamped tight around a small leather bag pressed against her chest. Josiah took stock of what he could see. Young, perhaps 25 years old. Native American, probably Crow judging by the distinctive beadwork on her dress. A dark purple bruise covered her left cheekbone where someone had struck her hard. Raw rope burns circled both wrists where she had been bound. Someone had beaten this woman. Someone had tied her up. And someone had put bullets in the air before she ended up in that river. Distant hoofbeats reached his ears. 4 horses, maybe 5, moving fast along the ridge above them. Coming closer, the woman heard them too. Terror flooded her dark eyes. "They are coming," she whispered through chattering teeth. "You must leave me. They will kill you too." Josiah made his decision in 3 seconds flat. He lifted her onto his mare, swung up behind her, and kicked the horse into a dead gallop. He knew these mountains better than any man alive. His cabin lay hidden in a narrow box canyon 2 miles west, invisible from any trail unless you knew exactly where to look. He rode hard through stands of pine and aspen, using every trick he had learned in 20 years of frontier warfare. He doubled back through a frozen creek bed to break their trail, dragged a pine branch behind the horse to sweep away hoof prints, changed direction 3 times before finally turning toward home. Any tracker following would find nothing but confusion and dead ends. 30 minutes later, Josiah carried the unconscious woman through the door of his cabin. The single room was small but solid. He had built it himself during his first year in these mountains, raising each log wall with his own hands. The construction followed principles drilled into him during years of frontier service. Walls of thick pine 8 inches through, capable of stopping any bullet short of artillery. One door with iron hinges and a bar of oak across the inside. 2 narrow windows positioned on opposite walls to provide crossfire coverage in any direction. Old habits died hard, especially habits that kept you alive. He laid her on the narrow bed near the stone fireplace and stripped away her soaked clothing. There was nothing improper in his actions. Wet clothes in this cold meant death, plain and simple. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned and turned to examine her injuries. The bullet wound in her left shoulder made him wince. The round had gouged a furrow through the meat of her upper arm, deep enough to expose muscle but missing bone and major vessels. She had
Who are you?
lost
And who
blood,
wants you dead
but
so
would
badly that they would
survive
push
if
you into the
infection
glacier?
My
stayed
name is a
away.
Crow woman. My
He
father was
cleaned the wound
executed
with
because of this
whiskey
map,
from
and
his
I would
last
rather lose
bottle,
it than give it to them.
packed it tight with clean cloth, and wrapped it secure. She moaned but did not wake. Probably better that way. The whiskey would have burned like hellfire. Her leather bag lay on the floor where it had fallen. Josiah picked it up. Inside, he found a single item, a piece of tanned deerskin covered with markings drawn in charcoal. He carried it to the window where gray light filtered through and studied what he held. A map. The drawing showed mountains, rivers, and a specific location marked with a circle in the northern reaches of the Bighorn Range. Beside the mark, someone had written words in careful English script. Supply cache, Fort C.F. Smith, abandoned 1868. Josiah felt ice form in his stomach that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. Fort C.F. Smith had been abandoned 13 years ago after the government signed the Fort Laramie Treaty with the Sioux. The soldiers pulled out fast, taking what they could carry and leaving behind what they could not. For years afterward, rumors circulated about weapons and ammunition hidden somewhere in those mountains. Enough firepower to arm 50 men. Most folks dismissed those stories as frontier legend. Apparently, the stories were true. The woman's eyes opened. She saw Josiah holding the map and tried to sit up despite the pain that twisted her features. Her hand reached toward the leather bag with desperate urgency. "That belongs to me," she said. Her voice came out hoarse and cracked, but steady underneath. Josiah handed her the bag without argument. Easy now, I did not take anything, but you owe me answers. He crouched beside the bed so their eyes were level. Who are you, and who wants you dead badly enough to chase you into a frozen river? She studied his face for a long moment, reading him, weighing whether this stranger could be trusted with the truth. My name is Nahimana, she finally said. Those men murdered my father 3 days ago. They want this map. I will die before letting them have it. Outside the window, the sky had darkened to the color of old iron. Wind began to moan through the canyon, carrying the first swirling flakes of what promised to be a serious storm. And somewhere in that gathering darkness, Josiah heard the faint but unmistakable sound of dogs barking. The hunters had found their trail. The blizzard struck with full fury 2 hours after sunset. Wind screamed through the canyon like a chorus of damned souls, driving snow sideways in sheets so thick that Josiah could barely see the woodpile 10 feet from his door. The temperature plummeted until the air itself seemed to freeze solid. Any man caught outside in weather like this would be dead before dawn, frozen stiff as a plank and buried beneath the drifts. That meant temporary safety. Not even the most determined hunters could track through a storm of this magnitude. But morning would come eventually. The blizzard would pass, and their enemies would still be out there, waiting. Josiah prepared for what lay ahead. He worked with methodical efficiency, performing tasks practiced 100 times during years of frontier warfare. First, he hauled buckets of water from the barrel by the stove and poured them across the cabin roof, letting the liquid freeze into a solid shell of ice. Fire arrows could not burn through 3 inches of frozen water. Next, he stacked bags of dirt beneath each window, creating barriers to absorb incoming bullets. He checked his weapons and laid them within easy reach, counted his ammunition twice, and memorized the number. Winchester Model 1876, chambered in .45-75 caliber. 14 rounds in his cartridge belt, each one inspected for dents and corrosion. A damaged case could jam the lever action at precisely the wrong moment and get him killed. Remington Army revolver in .44 caliber, 6 rounds in the cylinder, an old design but utterly reliable. This particular gun had served him for 20 years without a single misfire. 20 bullets total, against at least 4 armed men, possibly more. The math was not encouraging. Nahimana watched him work from her
You used
position
to
near
be a
the
soldier.
fire.
Why do you live alone
The
in this
violent
freezing
trembling
place?
Because all
had
the people I
stopped and
loved
color had
are
returned to her
gone,
face.
and I'm tired
She
of seeing
pushed
it happen
herself
again.
upright against the wall, wincing at the pain in her wounded shoulder but refusing to show weakness. You were a soldier, she said. Statement, not question. Sergeant, 2nd Cavalry. Long time ago. Why do you live alone in this place, so far from other people? Josiah paused in his work. The question cut deeper than she probably intended. Because everyone I cared about is dead, he said, and I grew tired of watching it happen. Nahimana nodded slowly. No pity showed in her eyes, only understanding. Loss was a language that needed no translation between strangers. The men following me, she continued, their leader calls himself Silas Redmond. He was a captain in your cavalry until 4 years ago. The army stripped his rank and discharged him for murdering civilians during a raid. The name hit Josiah like a rifle bullet to the chest. Silas Redmond. He had spent 5 years hunting that name across 3 territories. 5 years following cold trails and dead-end rumors. 5 years dreaming about the moment he would look into those gray eyes and pull the trigger. I know him, Josiah said quietly. How? September of 1876. Redmond led a cavalry unit through the Powder River Valley. They attacked a homestead at dawn, burned every building to the ground, killed everyone inside. His hands had curled into fists without his conscious will. The army called it a tragic mistake, said Redmond's men believed they were hitting a hostile Indian camp. But there was nothing hostile about that place. Just farmers trying to build new lives, just families. You lost someone in that raid. My wife, Sarah, my daughter, Emma. The words came out flat as stones. Sarah was 31 years old. Emma had just turned 6. They burned alive in our home while I was 50 miles away on a scouting mission. I never even got to say goodbye. Silence filled the cabin. Only the howling wind spoke, battering against log walls that held firm against its fury. I grieve with you, Nahimana said softly. Grief does not bring them back. Josiah turned from the window to face her directly. Now tell me everything about Redmond. What is he planning? Why does he need that map badly enough to kill for it? Nahimana pulled the leather bag closer against her chest, as if protecting a child. My father served as a scout for your army for 12 years. After the great battle where Longhair Custer fell, he was stationed at Fort Keogh. 2 winters ago, while hunting in these mountains, he discovered a cave. Inside were weapons left behind when Fort C.F. Smith was abandoned. Springfield rifles, cartridges, possibly explosives, enough to equip 50 men for war. And he kept the location secret. He understood what would happen if such knowledge spread. Men would kill to possess that arsenal. Many innocent people would die because of it. Her voice hardened. So my father drew this map and told no one. He planned to reveal the location to Army authorities after showing them where to recover the weapon safely. But Redmond found out somehow. A deserter from my father's unit, a weak man who sold information for whiskey money. Nahimana's jaw tightened with controlled anger. Redmond came to our home with 5 of his men. They tied my father to a chair and tortured him for 2 days, burning, cutting, breaking his fingers one by one. Through all of it, my father never spoke. He never gave them what they wanted. What happened then? Redmond shot him through the head. Her voice remained steady, but Josiah saw the pain flickering behind her dark eyes. Then he
Hold the
turned
back
his
window.
attention to
Shoot at
me.
the first sign of movement. Don't
He said
hesitate.
a young woman
You
could be
destroyed
made
your
to
family
talk
and
where an
killed my
old man
father.
could not.
We'll settle this tonight.
But you escaped. I pretended death when one of his men struck me unconscious. I lay still until darkness came and they grew careless with their watch. Then I took the map from where my father had hidden it and ran. Josiah processed everything she had told him. Redmond wanted those weapons, that much was clear. But not simply to sell them. A man like Silas Redmond had larger ambitions. He is planning something, Josiah said. Something that requires serious firepower. I heard him speaking while I was bound. There is a train carrying gold bullion from the Deadwood mines scheduled to pass through next month. Redmond has spent years gathering outlaws and deserters to his cause. He now commands 30 or 40 men. With weapons from that cave, he means to rob the train and vanish into the territories. An attack like that would kill dozens. That is why my father refused to surrender the map. That is why I would rather have drowned in your river than let Redmond succeed. The fire crackled in the silence between them. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but the sound seemed distant now. Something had begun to stir inside Josiah Cray. Something he believed had died alongside his family in that burning homestead 5 years ago. Purpose. For so long, vengeance had been his only reason to keep breathing. Finding Redmond, making him pay. But the search led nowhere, and eventually Josiah surrendered to despair. He retreated to this wilderness, accepted that he would die alone and unmourned, his family unavenged, his life meaningless. Now Redmond had delivered himself practically to Josiah's doorstep. He walked to the gun rack and lifted down the Winchester. Check the action, dry and smooth. When this storm breaks, he said, they will come for us. I know. I have 20 bullets. They have at least 4 men, probably more. The odds are against us. Nahimana pushed herself away from the wall and stood upright despite the pain in her shoulder. She held out her hand. I can shoot. My father taught me from the time I could hold a weapon. Josiah studied her for a moment. Despite everything she had endured, her eyes held no fear, only fierce determination. He handed her the Remington. Take the back window. Shoot anything that moves out there. Do not hesitate. Do not ask questions. Just shoot. She checked the cylinder with practiced efficiency, spun it once, snapped it closed. Professional movements that spoke of long familiarity with firearms. Redmond murdered your family, she said. He murdered mine. Tonight we end this together. Josiah nodded once. Outside, the blizzard began to weaken. Dawn was perhaps 4 hours away. When the sun rose, the killing would begin. This time the hunted would be ready. The storm died at 3 in the morning. Josiah stood by the window, watching ragged clouds tear apart to reveal a bright winter moon. Fresh snow lay 2 feet deep across the canyon floor, glowing silver in the pale light. The scene looked peaceful, beautiful even. A postcard image of wilderness serenity. The beauty was a lie. Movement flickered at the tree line 200 yards out. 4 shapes emerged from the darkness between the pines. 3 men spread in a loose skirmish line, rifles held ready. The 4th sat tall on a gray horse, directing the others with hand signals. Even at this distance, even after 5 years, Josiah recognized that 4th rider instantly. Silas Redmond, tall and gaunt, with a scar running from his forehead to his chin along the left side of his face. He sat the saddle with military bearing, spine rigid as a rifle barrel. His head turned slowly as he surveyed the cabin, calculating angles of attack, assessing weaknesses. 5 years of hunting, and the devil had finally come to him. I count 4, Nehemiah whispered from the back window. No movement on this side yet. They will try to flank us once shooting starts. Watch for anyone circling around. Redmond's voice rang out across the snow-covered clearing. You in the cabin, I know someone is sheltering there. Send out the crow woman and the map she carries. Do that, and I will let you live to see another sunrise. Josiah lifted his Winchester, settled the brass bead sight on Redmond's chest, then shifted aim to the man standing closest to him. Better to reduce their numbers first. Redmond would die, but not until Josiah was ready to make it personal. Silas Redmond, he shouted back. Does the name Josiah Cray mean anything to you? Does the homestead you burned in Powder River Valley 5 years ago ring any bells in that rotten head of yours? Silence from outside, then cold, mocking laughter. Cray? Sergeant Cray? Well, well. I assumed you put a bullet in your own brain years ago after what happened to your family. Most men would have. You assumed wrong. So I did. Tell me, Sergeant, do you still remember what your wife looked like? I certainly do. She was quite pretty before the fire reached her. Something cold and dark settled into Josiah's chest. Not rage, something beyond rage. A crystalline clarity that slowed time and sharpened his senses to a razor edge. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder. 200 yards distant, the man beside Redmond spun backward and collapsed face first into the snow. Dead before he hit the ground. The fight had begun. Gunfire erupted across the clearing. Bullets thudded into the cabin's log walls, punching through chinking and sending splinters flying. Josiah worked the lever action and fired again. Missed, fired a 3rd time. A second man stumbled and went down, clutching his thigh. Movement behind, Nahimana shouted. Her Remington barked twice in rapid succession. Outside the back window, someone screamed in pain, and the sound of running footsteps retreated into the darkness. Redmond and his remaining able man dove behind a deadfall log and returned fire. Bullets cracked through the air around Josiah's head, forcing him to duck below the window frame. He counted shots in his head. 4 rounds expended, 10 remaining. For an hour, neither side gained advantage. The moon climbed higher, flooding the canyon with cold white light that made concealment nearly impossible. Josiah stayed by his window, eyes burning from exhaustion and strain, refusing to look away for even a second. Nahimana held her position at the back, wounded shoulder throbbing, but her aim still true. Then flame erupted in the darkness. A burning torch arced through the night sky, trailing sparks and smoke. It struck the cabin roof with a thud and bounced off harmlessly. The ice shell Josiah had created earlier did its job, sending the firebrand sliding away into the snow. But the distraction served its purpose. The front door exploded inward. A massive shape crashed through the opening, shoulder first, moving fast. Josiah spun to meet the attack, but too slow. The intruder slammed into him and drove him backward into the wall. Fists flew in the cramped space. Josiah took a blow to the face that filled his mouth with blood. He drove his elbow into his attacker's throat and heard a satisfying gurgle of pain. The man staggered. Josiah swung the Winchester like a club, connecting with the side of his skull. Bone cracked. The attacker went down and did not rise. Behind him, Nahimana screamed. Josiah whirled. A second man had come through the back window, while attention focused on the front assault. He held a knife and advanced on Nahimana with murder in his eyes. She raised the Remington, but her wounded shoulder betrayed her at the critical moment. The blade slashed across her forearm, and the revolver fell from nerveless fingers. Josiah shot him through the spine. The man dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He twitched once on the cabin floor and then lay still. No time to celebrate. No time to breathe. "Move," Josiah barked. "We cannot stay here." He grabbed Nahimana's uninjured arm and pulled her toward the front door. They stumbled out into the snow, the cold hitting them like a wall. Blood from a gash on Josiah's forehead ran into his eyes, and he swiped it away impatiently. Silas Redmond stood 30 feet away. He held a Colt revolver aimed directly at Josiah's chest. A thin smile curved his scarred face. "End of the trail, Sergeant." Josiah pushed Nahimana behind him and faced his enemy with empty hands. His Winchester lay somewhere back in the cabin. The Remington was lost. He had nothing left but his fists and his hatred. "Just you and me now, Silas. Your men are down. Then I will finish this myself. I always did prefer personal work." Redmond fired. The bullet tore through Josiah's left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He fell to one knee in the snow, pain exploding through his body in white-hot waves. His arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips. Redmond walked closer, savoring the moment. "Your wife screamed for nearly an hour before the smoke finally took her. Did you know that? Begged me to let her go. Said she had a little girl waiting for her, as if that would inspire mercy in my heart." Josiah tried to rise. His legs refused to cooperate. "Your daughter never screamed, though. I will give her credit for that. She just stared at me with those big brown eyes while the flames climbed the walls around her. Never made a sound." Something shattered inside Josiah Cray. Not his body, not his courage, his fear, his caution. Every restraint that had held him back for 5 years broke apart like rotten wood. He launched himself at Redmond. The Colt fired again, the bullet scorching past Josiah's ear, close enough to leave a burn. Then they collided and went down together in a tangle of limbs, rolling through the bloody snow. Fists and elbows, knees and teeth. Two men fighting like rabid animals, stripped of everything civilized. Redmond produced a knife from somewhere. The blade slashed across Josiah's ribs, cutting deep into muscle. Blood sprayed across the white snow in a crimson arc. But Josiah caught the knife hand before it could strike again. Twisted with all his remaining strength, bones snapped. Redmond screamed. They separated, both men wounded, both gasping for breath. Redmond crawled toward his dropped revolver, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Josiah crawled toward the cabin door, toward the Winchester that lay somewhere inside. Redmond reached his gun first. He raised it with his unbroken hand, finger tightening on the trigger. A smile of triumph spread across his ruined face. A gunshot split the night. Redmond jerked, looked down at the hole that had appeared in his chest. Blood bubbled up around the wound. Nahimana stood behind him, the recovered Remington steady in both hands despite her injuries. That was for my father, she said. Her voice did not waver. Redmond turned towards her, disbelief spreading across his scarred features. Josiah reached the Winchester. This is for Sarah, he said, and fired. The bullet punched through Redmond's stomach. And this is for Emma. The second round took him through the heart. Silas Redmond fell face first into the snow and did not move again. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold when the bleeding finally stopped. Josiah sat with his back against the cabin wall, bandages wrapped tight around his shoulder and ribs. The wounds were serious but not fatal. He had survived worse during his cavalry years, though not by much. Nahimana sat beside him, her own injuries cleaned and dressed with strips torn from the last clean shirt he owned. They had survived the night, barely. 4 bodies lay scattered across the bloody snow. Redmond nearest, his dead eyes staring at the brightening sky. The man who had murdered Josiah's family. The monster who had haunted his nightmares for half a decade. Gone now. Forever. Josiah waited to feel triumph. Victory. Some measure of satisfaction to fill the hollow space that had lived inside his chest since that terrible morning 5 years ago. What he felt instead was only exhaustion. And beneath that, unexpectedly, the faintest whisper of relief. It does not bring them back, Nahimana said quietly. She had read his thoughts. No, nothing ever could. But it is finished. Surely that counts for something. Josiah looked at the young woman beside him. She had lost her father 3 days ago, had nearly lost her own life multiple times since, yet she sat here with fire still burning in her dark eyes, unbowed and unbroken. Your father was a brave man, he said. 2 days of torture, and he never gave them what they wanted. He understood what those weapons would mean in the wrong hands. How many innocent people would, if Redmond succeeded? She pulled the leather bag from inside her coat. He gave his life to protect this secret. Josiah stared at the bag. Inside lay a map worth killing for. Weapons enough to equip an army. Power enough to reshape the territory's future. What will you do with it? He asked. Nahimana held the bag toward him. You saved my life. You killed the man who murdered my father. By any right, this belongs to you now. Josiah took the bag and felt its weight in his hands. He could use this map himself. Sell the information to the army for a small fortune. Lead a party to the cave and claim the weapons for his own purposes. Start over somewhere far from these blood-soaked mountains, wealthy enough to forget everything that had happened. But forgetting was impossible. Money could not buy back lost years. Gold could not resurrect the dead, and those weapons would only spawn more violence, more widows weeping, more children left orphaned and alone. Josiah stood and walked toward the small fire still smoldering where Redmond's men had made camp the night before. What are you doing? Nahimana asked. He threw the map into the flames. Are you mad? That represents a fortune beyond counting. It represents blood, Josiah said, watching the leather curl and blacken. This map killed your father. Nearly killed both of us. It would have killed dozens more if Redmond had succeeded with his train robbery. Better that those weapons rust away in their cave until the mountains themselves crumble. Nahimana rose and limped to stand beside him. Together they watched the map burn until only ashes remained, floating upward on the heated air. My father would have approved, she said finally. I know. They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher above the peaks. Fresh snow sparkled like scattered diamonds in the morning light. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle called to its mate. What will you do now? Nahimana asked. Where will you go? Josiah considered the question. For 5 years, vengeance had been his only reason to continue breathing. That purpose was now ash, blowing away on the winter wind like the remnants of the burned map. He had no family waiting, no home worth returning to, nothing calling him anywhere. I do not know, he admitted. First time in 5 years, I have no one left to hunt. Nahimana studied his weathered face with something that might have been understanding, or perhaps invitation. My people will need someone to teach the young men how to shoot properly. The army and the settlers push closer to our lands every season. We must be ready to defend what is ours. She paused. You could return with me, not forever, just until you decide what comes next. Josiah almost refused from pure habit. Old instincts told him to stay isolated, stay safe, stay far away from anyone else he might lose. But those instincts had brought him nothing except cold nights and empty years. Perhaps the time had come to try a different path. I will escort you home first, he said. We both need proper rest and healing before anything else. After that, we can discuss the future. 5 days later, they reached the edge of Crow territory. A group of warriors met them at the boundary, alerted by smoke signals Nahimana had sent during their journey. The men regarded Josiah with suspicious eyes at first. A white stranger entering their lands usually meant trouble of one kind or another. But Nahimana spoke to them at length in their own language. She told them what had happened, how this man had pulled her from the frozen river, how he had fought alongside her against overwhelming odds, how he had killed the murderer of her father, how he had destroyed the map rather than profit from its dark promise. The warriors' expressions transformed. The eldest among them stepped forward and clasped Josiah's arm in the traditional greeting of friendship. You saved the daughter of Red Eagle, he said in careful English. You are a friend to the Crow people from this day forward. You are welcome in our camps and at our fires. Josiah nodded his acceptance, uncertain what words were appropriate. Nahimana mounted a fresh horse provided by her kinsman. She looked down at Josiah with warmth in her eyes that had not been there when they first met in the frozen river. The mountains are beautiful when spring comes, she said. The snow melts away. The rivers run clear and full of fish. The meadows turn green with new grass. Perhaps you will see for yourself. Josiah watched her ride away with her people until they disappeared over the western ridge. Then he turned his borrowed horse and headed back toward the wilderness. He had a half-ruined cabin to repair, wounds that needed weeks to heal properly, a life to rebuild from ashes and blood. But the emptiness that had consumed him for 5 long years had finally begun to lift. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to notice the difference. The cold river had nearly claimed his life. The battle had nearly broken his body. But somewhere in all that blood and snow, Josiah Cray had discovered something he thought was lost forever. A reason to keep breathing. Not revenge, not duty, not even love exactly. Just a simple possibility that tomorrow might be worth seeing after all. He rode west toward the setting sun, the mountains rising purple and gold against the fading sky. Behind him, the past lay buried beneath fresh snow. Ahead, the future stretched out like an unwritten page waiting for the first words. After 5 years spent staring backward into darkness, Josiah Cray finally wanted to see what waited ahead. Perhaps Nahimana was right. Perhaps spring in the mountains would be beautiful this year. Perhaps he would be there to see it. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling us your thoughts and stay tuned for more tales from the Old West. Until next time, may your trails be smooth and your aim be true.
The story of the man hiding in the Wyoming winter and the Native American girl carrying a map offers a clear lesson. While loss can turn people cold, humanity always has room to thrive. He chose to turn his back on the world because of his pain, but a single moment of saving someone from the icy river brought him back to his sense of responsibility and purpose. The girl teaches us about resilience, pursued, hurt, yet not losing her dignity and purpose. More importantly, the story reminds us that power and treasure are not worth the blood of innocent people. When the man burns the map, it is a choice of conscience, ending the cycle of violence to open the door to a better future.